helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Life Transformation Show. I'm your co-host, Denise Hart. Today's topic is Grief Uncovered, how to heal from deep loss. We'll be reflecting on the biblical story of King David's profound grief over the loss of his son. And this is found in 2 Samuel chapter 12. So in this two-part series, we will explore the difference between healthy expressions of mourning and signs of unhealthy grief, because this can lead to mental health struggles. We will also discuss strategies to facilitate healthy grieving, along with the do's and the don'ts when supporting others through their personal experiences of loss. So join us for this heartfelt conversation on understanding and navigating grief with compassion and wisdom. Joining me in studio today is psychotherapist Michael Hart. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Denise. This is such an important topic because grief touches everyone. Yet, so many people don't know how to go through the grieving process in a healthy way. And still, others are unsure as to how to support someone who is grieving. Have you ever been around someone who has just lost a loved one and you're not sure about what to say? You're not sure if you'll say the wrong thing, and you're just there lost for word, wondering, am I making it better or am I making it worse? So that is why I'm excited to do this show today, because this show is going to shed light on how we can approach grief in a way that promotes healing and truly helps those who are hurting.
So, Michael, let's get right into King David's story. King David's response to his child's death might seem really strange to many people. After days of fasting and pleading and mourning while the child was alive, he quickly rose, washed, and worshipped God upon hearing of the child's death. And this is found in 2 Samuel 12, verse 20. So how was David able to bounce back so quickly after such a profound loss?
That's a very good question, Denise. And I think King David's reaction can be explained by the concept that we as psychologists and psychotherapists call anticipatory grief. So anticipatory grief occurs when someone begins to grieve before the loss actually happens, as King David did while the child was still seriously ill. So during that time when the child was sick, David expressed great sorrow, fasting and praying for his child. So by the time the loss occurred, he had already processed much of his grief. And this enabled him to respond with a sense of acceptance. So think of it that David was mourning all these days while the child was sick in installments. So by the time the child actually died, it wasn't such a big loss as before. So maybe you have been in this position where you had a loved one that was sick for months or maybe even years, and that loved one is hospitalized and you're visiting day after day, and you visit and you shed tears and you cry with each diagnosis that shows that this person has limited time to live. And then when the person finally dies, you find that you don't have the overwhelming sense of grief as some people do. And maybe you even have felt guilty. Why is it that I am not so deeply hurt? As a matter of fact, some people, after they have gone through anticipatory grief for months, they feel guilty because when the person actually dies, they have a sense of relief. And this is not because they do not love the person that passed away, but the fact is that they had been grieving for several months. So in psychological terms, anticipatory grief allows individuals to emotionally prepare for the inevitable, so that when the loss occurs, they may find it easier to move forward. So David's quick recovery can be seen as a result of having grieved his son's death ahead of time. And this allowed him to accept God's will when the moment of death finally came. So this story illustrates how emotional preparation, while painful, can help to ease the transition through the finality of the loss of a loved one.
So, Michael, what I'm hearing you say, in layman terms, we could say that anticipatory grief, people can go through that when they have made peace.
Absolutely. They have made peace. They have a time to make peace. They have a time to pray and to get the support that they need. And after months of going through this, they don't have the same intense grief that they would have felt if the death had occurred suddenly.
A very good explanation. So in the story of King David, he mourns the loss of his son deeply. So how can we differentiate between healthy grieving and signs of unhealthy grief, such as becoming stuck in the mourning process?
So in the biblical passage, we see that David mourns the impending loss of his son. However, when the child dies, he raises from his grief, showing a healthy balance between sorrow and acceptance. And I think as we go through the mourning process, what we're doing is we're moving from sorrow to acceptance. And psychologists talks about the 5 stages of grief that I won't get into, but along those 5 stages, we are moving away from sorrow and we are going to this final stage of acceptance. Psychologists calls the first stage the stage of denial. And this is where a person when someone dies, they may not immediately fully and psychologically accept the fact that the person is no longer there. So they may be in some kind of denial. So I think healthy grief should be moving towards acceptance. So if someone is stuck in the grieving process where they can come to this place of acceptance, even months or years after the person have died, that might be a sign that they're not healing healthily. And we have other biblical passages that highlight similar healthy expressions of grief. So, for example, in Genesis 23:2, we see that Abraham mourns the death of Sarah, weeping openly, but continues on his journey of life afterwards. So this continuing of Abraham on his journey shows that he was not stuck. He was not stuck at Sarah's graveside. He was able to mourn, but he eventually moved on. And I see a tendency in today's society where there is this desire to move away from mourning, where some people will say they're having a celebration instead. But I think it's healthy to mourn. It's healthy to identify the time of mourning as a time of mourning, because it gives to us the permission to be sad, the permission to weep. But I think there are some times when we see mourning and weeping as a sign of weakness or someone falling apart. So conversely, unhealthy grief is also hinted at in the story of Jacob in Genesis 37 verses 34 to 35. After believing that his son Joseph had died, Jacob refuses to be comforted. So in other words, he remained stuck in a state of mourning for a long time. And Jacob being stuck in this state of mourning for a long time led to him treating his son Benjamin, his youngest son Benjamin, in a way as if he was overly protective of Benjamin. So when the other sons traveled to Egypt, Benjamin, who was by that time a grown man, was not allowed to go because Jacob was stuck in his grief and was afraid of losing Benjamin because he was suffering from the trauma, still stuck in the trauma of Joseph's death, believing Joseph to be dead.
I like what you said, Michael, about mourning and weeping, that it's okay to do so. We saw that with our own Lord Jesus. He wept when his friend Lazarus died. So, like David, he faced anticipatory grief before his child had passed. So how can someone prepare emotionally when they know a loss is coming?
I think that's a very good question. And I think I'll go into some detail here with this one because many of us have gone through this, or we will go through it at some time, or we may know someone who is going through that stage now of anticipatory grief, that you have a loved one who has just been diagnosed with a terminal illness and the prognosis doesn't look good. And so if you are in this stage where you're anticipating that death is imminent, then it's essential, first of all, to acknowledge your feelings. Many of us try to deny the reality of what is happening. And this is when it can become unhealthy. And yes, I know that we can believe in healing and we should pray for the person's healing. But when we fail to acknowledge how we really feel, that can lead to unhealthy grieving. So acknowledge, recognize that you feel sad. Journal about your sadness. Journal about your anger. Maybe you're even angry at God for allowing your loved one to be going through what they're going through. And so having the space to express how you feel to God will not offend God. We see in the book of Job that when Job lost his children, when his children died and he lost his health, that he had some very harsh words to say to God. Like, for example, he said to God that in chapter 16 and 17 of Job, he talks about how he felt like he was a target for God. He felt as if God had his arrows aimed at him and was taking shots at him. And we see that there was no reprimand toward Job in that book, because God understands that Job was hurting and he was angry about what he was suffering. Job even said, "Cursed be the day that I was born." So in other words, he's saying to God, "God, why didn't you take my life at birth? This is just too much for me to bear." But I see that among us as Christians, sometimes we get into this place where we feel we have to fake strength. And so we are dying inside, but we are not saying how we feel. We use Christianese language to make it sound as if we are happy despite the fact that our loved one is dying. So express sadness, express fear, express anger, express guilt, and even relief. If you feel a sense of relief that your loved one is going to be taken out of their suffering, it's not incorrect to express what you are really feeling inside. And I think a next step that is important for healthy grieving is to practice self-care. Many of us, we burn ourselves out looking after the person who is ill. And I'm not saying that you're not supposed to sacrifice your time to be there at the person's bedside. What I am saying is that you should not neglect looking after yourself. You should try to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. You should try to make sure that you're eating healthily. You should try to make sure that you're getting exercise, because burning yourself out during the anticipatory part of the grieving process will lead to you taking a longer time to recover afterwards. So it's crucial to practice self-care.
Michael will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services has been using 2 Samuel chapter 12 to speak on the topic, Grief Uncovered, How to Heal from Deep Loss. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 1-877-204-2914 or 613-699-1677, where you can make a donation to this Christ-centered ministry. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. Back to Michael.
And it's also important to prepare for the aftermath. Sometimes we go into this place of denial and we fail to accept that there is going to be a time when our loved one is no longer around. And I think preparing for the aftermath, thinking ahead about practical matters, such as discussing end-of-life wishes or funeral arrangements, can alleviate future stress and provide you with a sense of control. Many of us shy away from those discussions, but they're actually healthy discussions because they're moving us towards this place of acceptance. So planning can also include discussing how family members want to support one another after the loss occurs. And this fosters collaboration, a collaborative approach to the grieving process.
Great points, Michael. Another thing, Michael, I'm sure you'll agree, is to have open conversation with your friends or your families or support groups, because those things can really help so that people are not isolated.
Absolutely.
So, in the case of David, the death was anticipated as he mourned for his ill son, allowing him to prepare emotionally. However, how do we cope with the sudden and unexpected death of a loved one, especially when we are caught off guard by the intensity of grief? And as you know, we are actually grieving at this time for a very good friend of ours, so I know this is very difficult and we are also learning from this. So help us to understand this, Michael.
That's a very good question. And I can just think about the sudden pain that I felt, Denise, when we heard about the news of this friend of ours, just 42 years old, who passed away suddenly. She wasn't sick. She wasn't expected to die. And she just died suddenly. We have a powerful biblical story that illustrates the suddenness of death. And it is the account of the death of Lazarus in John 11. So Lazarus fell ill before his sisters Mary and Martha could prepare for the possible loss, he died. This grief was palpable, and it's marked by shock and confusion as they had hoped for his recovery. They had hoped that Jesus would have come and would have healed him. So when Jesus arrived, Mary expressed her sorrow and her frustration, saying, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That's John 11:21. So this moment reflects not only her deep sadness, but also a level of anger at Jesus for not arriving to save Lazarus. So Mary's reaction is a powerful reminder that when faced with the sudden loss of a loved one, feelings of anger and betrayal can arise, particularly towards God. Many may question why God did not protect their loved ones or intervene to prevent the tragedy. And this is a normal part of human existence because we do not understand why tragedies happen. and why a loving God allowed those things to happen. So we can ask these questions, and we can express anger and disappointment towards God if we feel that way. So this anger that Mary felt, there was no rebuke. Jesus did not rebuke her when he came. Jesus had a conversation with her. And sometimes when we begin to express how we really feel, it opens up the place for the Holy Spirit to dialogue with us and to lead us on a journey of faith that can lead to a deeper faith and a deeper trust in God. But sometimes we never get there because we do not allow ourselves to express how we feel. So in such situations where there's a sudden death, it is important to allow ourselves to express these feelings without shame. Just as Mary openly voiced her frustration and anger, acknowledging that she was disappointed in Jesus. So this does not diminish our faith. Rather, it is a natural response to deep loss and confusion. However, the story of Lazarus also offers profound comfort, especially regarding the afterlife. After mourning with Mary and Martha, Jesus declared, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die." So this promise of resurrection provides hope, not only for eternal life, but for the possibility of reunion with the loved ones who have passed away. The Apostle Paul said it this way, "Death, where is thy sting? Grave, where is your victory?" The hope that we have in our faith, that death is not final, that death does not have the last word, can be an important source of comfort and hope when we are faced with deep sorrow. But this story also highlights the importance of community when we are faced with grief. When you have a sudden loss of a loved one, it's not healthy to remain alone. Just as Mary had her sister and friends to support her, reaching out to loved ones during times of loss can provide comfort and validation, sharing feelings, including anger with others, who can foster healing and create a space for collective mourning. But ultimately, while sudden death brings unique challenges and may evoke anger towards God, it can also lead to a deeper connection with those who share our grief and an opportunity for emotional healing. So as we go through this sudden loss, we can see that there are opportunities that arise as well. Yes, we don't have the answers. We don't know why God allowed this to happen. But if you follow the example that I just outlay here in how Mary dealt with her sudden loss, these are principles that can help you to move towards that place of acceptance and healthy grieving.
Yes, Michael, those are great points. Holding on to scriptures and each other can really give us hope and comfort at this time. So in David's case, healthy coping after the loss of his son, he rose up from mourning and started worshiping God. So this illustrates the potential for healing and moving forward. But what are the signs of unhealthy grieving? And how can we understand the principle of complicated grief and its causes?
That's a very good question, Denise. And I think this is a very important thing for us to cover in some detail as well. So we might not get through all of this in this show, but as we said, this is a 2-part series. We are going to be looking at this because I think it's very important for us to understand what are the signs of unhealthy grieving. And I think one of the first signs of unhealthy grieving is persistent yearning and preoccupation with thoughts of the deceased person. And yes, it is normal when someone just passes away for you to be thinking about them all the time, for there to be a deep longing, but it can get to a point where it becomes unhealthy. So psychologists have identified certain timelines that are, they're not cast in stone, but they're healthy frameworks that you can use to measure whether or not you are moving along in the grieving process. So the initial period, the normal preoccupation timeline initially is from 0 to 3 months. So that first 3 months is when, in the immediate aftermath of a loss, it is typical for individuals to be intensely preoccupied with thoughts of the deceased. So this can include emotional reaction such as sadness, weeping, anger, and confusion, along with frequent memories and reminders of the loved one. And so during this phase, the individual may find it hard to focus on daily tasks. So that's the first 3 months. The adjustment phase, the second phase, is what psychologists call the adjustment phase. And this is month 3 to 6. So as time progresses, the initial intensity of our preoccupation may begin to lessen, but it is still common to think about the loved one regularly. So during this period, individuals may still have vivid memories and emotional reactions, but may also start to engage more with their surroundings and daily responsibilities. And the third period is the longer term period from 6 to 12 months. After 6 months, it is typical for thoughts about the deceased to become less intrusive and more integrated into one's daily life. So while you may still remember the loved one and be sad, the thoughts usually becomes less intense. But when preoccupation goes beyond the 12 months period, if after 12 months of the person passing away, individuals still find themselves unable to move forward with their lives and they become stuck in the cycle of ruminating. They can't cope. They're falling apart. They're studying from anxiety. It is quite possible that this person has entered into what is known as complicated grief. And we don't have the time to go much deeper into this because I see that we're out of time, but this is such an important topic. Then he said, I don't want to rush it. So next week, we're going to continue looking at some of the other signs before we go into the rest of part 2.
Well, thank you, Michael, for this discussion. I hope we gave our listeners some hope and comfort. Thank you for joining us today as we explore the topic Grief Uncovered, How to Heal from Deep Loss. Tune in next Monday morning at 9:30 when we will continue with part 2.